They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but at 3 a.m., it tastes like diesel and victory. 8 amber beacons rolled past my bedroom window, brake winches squealed, and by sunrise, every HOA ringleader's car had vanished into the legal black hole known as County Impound, an expensive way to learn that private road. Isn't a suggestion, though, to tell it right, you have to rewind to the smell of hot tar that started this mess? 2, the morning my nostrils filled with asphalt, and my boots crunched on a driveway I'd paid $80,000 extra to keep gravel on purpose. The kind of pea stone that slows people down and keeps life quiet. I bought this 3-acre hill country slice for Alina and our daughter Sophia Jasmine. Drifting off the porch at dusk, mockingbirds practicing arias at dawn, and the key detail that came stapled to my sanity was a separate deed to the access road. Carved out by a wily old rancher named George Blackwood in 1987 so no HOA could ever touch it. Private in perpetuity were the magic words, and the ink had been dry since Reagan jokes were new. So when I stepped outside that Tuesday to the reek of fresh asphalt and saw a crew in neon vests steamrolling my private gravel into glossy black, men's posts yanked like rotten molars and my survey stakes hammered into scrap, I didn't yell. I took inventory. A foreman waving a work order signed by one Vivian Ashworth. HOA president and human parking ticket. Willowbrook Commons grand entrance pillars sprouting at the junction with my land, brass plaques preening in the sun, like they'd always belonged to the rest. 2023, in case posterity forgot the year theft tried to wear a tuxedo. I walked the line of the damage and counted trespasses the way men count heartbeats after a scare. I drove straight to the HOA office in the strip mall, boots tacky with tar, and found Vivian seated behind a wall of real estate trophies and community service plaques, her perfume hanging over the room like expensive gilt. She unlidded a smile sharp enough to cut tile and slid across an enlarged plat with my road highlighted. In neon yellow, hand-labeled Future Community Thoroughfare, then said rustic as if it were a disease. "We're bringing your access up to community standards, mister." Rockwell, the previous owner, verbally agreed to eventual sharing, you understand? "Verbal agreements don't move dirt in Texas," I said, and her pupils did that little dilation thing pet dogs do before they nip. The next day, a certified letter met me at the mailbox. $3,200 assessment for the upgrade. $85 monthly maintenance. 30 days to install appropriate community standard landscaping. And the kicker, threats of liens and legal action if I fail to maintain the common area formerly known as my private driveway. The audacity would have been breathtaking if it weren't so predictable. 2 hours later, a security guard in a polo shirt and mirrored shades flagged me down at the mouth of my own drive and asked for ID to verify authorization to use. This community access clipboard poised like he was writing tickets to oxygen. "Community safety protocols?" He shrugged. "Ma'am's orders." I didn't argue. I dialed the county planning office. Here's something most folks don't know, unless they've poured as much concrete as I have. Everything that touches dirt and drainage needs a permit, from sidewalks to signage to a speed bump nobody asked for. And a quiet voice on the other end of the line confirmed exactly 0 permits existed for any road work at our coordinates. By Thursday, the county stapled a stop work order in big, cheerful orange right to Vivian's new stone pillars, and I stood in the Texas wind and watched that paper flap like a tiny flag of sanity. Her counterpunch was pure theater and petty as a hangnail. An emergency board meeting in the clubhouse where I was naturally not invited. My neighbor Marquesa, retired Marine with evening dog walk timing and ears like a satellite dish, reported back that they'd voted to fine me $500 a day for failure to maintain common area and brainstormed community awareness tactics, which by Friday materialized as roving bands of beautification walkers drifting past our home in matching athleisure, phones raised, whispering at our mailbox color and Elena's garden gnomes like docents in a museum of imagined crimes. Facebook lit up with slanted photos captioned interesting landscaping choices. And on Monday, a clerk at the county counter with Vivian's last name, and her hair looked me dead in the eye and said my original survey was missing from the file, that I'd need to reapply for a driveway access permit, fee $2,800, processing 6 to 8 months, and during that period, my road status would be under review. I've seen shakedowns in suits and shakedowns in work boots. This one wore a smile. Meanwhile, Sophia's friends discovered our new asphalt was an excellent skate park, and their boards clattered under our bedroom window every morning at 7, while Alina banged cabinet doors 3 rooms away, caught between fury and disbelief. The mailbox brought another certified envelope persona non grata in my own neighborhood. Banned from a place I legally owned, like a bouncer had appeared. At the edge of my lawn to protect property values from their owner. Here's what Vivian didn't know, and what made my coffee taste better than it had in a week. I am not the man you expect when you pave his driveway overnight. Before I traded job site radios for porch birds, I built and sold concrete for a living. And tucked between my old bid spreadsheets and the title to this land are 3 things you do not want pointed at your scheme. Towing contract with every impound lot in the county from the days we kept job site access clear, a pie named Rex who can pull public records out of courthouse basements that haven't seen daylight since cassette tapes, and a surveyor who speaks fluent GPS and will stake a line so straight a judge could balance a gavel on it. I ordered the survey on my lunch break price tag, $3,200. A number I picked with poetic intonation, dialed the county engineer to log a formal complaint about unpermitted work, drainage impacts, and the illegal placement of signage on private property. I saved a copy of the stop work photo and pinned it beside the brass plate selfie. Vivian had posted at dawn when she christened my front gate, the grand entrance to a place I don't live. When the guard tried to verify me again the next morning, I waved and told him to make sure his registration was current, then kept counting receipts. Alina came home from the store with lavender in her hair and stress in her eyes. Neighbors had cornered her between frozen peas and produce to say they were concerned. Did we need to sell? Did we understand we were endangering school buses by insisting on a private road? I made tea because sometimes the only useful tool in a crisis is boiling water in a quiet kitchen. That night, I laid George Blackwood's deed on the dining table, ran my finger across the lines that had saved his sanity. 40 years ago, access roads shall remain private property in perpetuity, not subject to any homeowner association covenants, assessments, or interference whatsoever. Anne smiled the kind of smile people misread until it's too late. Vivian had installed pillars on a boundary she didn't own, billed me for destroying my property, and posted stop work orange like it was Decker, then sent a rent-a-cop to my driveway to turn the knife. I've seen this play from both sides build a fait accompli. Brand it community, shame and papercut the holdout into submission, and I've learned 2 truths. Permits outlast hashtags and chains clank the same at 3 o'clock whether they're wrapped around a fence or a BMW. So I sharpened my pencil and sketched. The week ahead, surveyors on Tuesday, Rex at the courthouse on Wednesday, county inspectors on Thursday, and on Friday, a few folks who'd parked their moral authority on my rights were going to learn what private in perpetuity sounds like when a tow hook kisses a subframe. Tuesday began with a tripod, a prism, and a prayer for straight lines. The survey crew rolled up just after sunrise, boots creaking, GPS poles blinking like tiny lighthouses, and I couldn't help noticing how quickly Vivian's beautification walkers materialized to watch men in orange vests drive steel stakes into ground sheep branded community. I'd hired my former business partner turned traffic engineer to coordinate the survey. $3,200 on the invoice, a number I chose with pettiness I won't pretend to be ashamed of. And within an hour, the beeps and chirps of satellites were translating into fluorescent tape and rebar, each marker a syllable in a sentence the county recorder already knew how to read. Private easement. Private in perpetuity, do not trespass. The guard in the golf cart tried to interrupt with a clipboard and a policy about authorized use. I waved him off and suggested he check the stop work order fluttering from the stone pillar like a hunting flag. Then watched him retreat behind mirrored lenses that made it hard to tell whether he was taking notes or just absorbing humiliation. Alina stood on the porch with her coffee, jaw set in a way I'd learned means she's cataloging everything for later. And Sophia, 15, brilliant, and undeserving of any of this, snapped a photo of the crew. With the shy defiance of someone who is deciding what kind of adult she wants to be, by noon, the surveyor handed me a preliminary plat with coordinates crisp enough to tattoo on a rock, and I slipped it into a sleeve in my binder behind a copy of George Blackwood's 1987 deed language. The holy writ that had saved my sanity more than once. Access road shall remain private property in perpetuity. Not subject to any homeowner association covenants, assessments, or interference whatsoever. Wednesday belonged to Rex, a man who considers dust an occupational hazard and courthouse basements a second home. He called from a room that probably hadn't been opened since the Reagan administration to report 3 discoveries in a voice as dry as the paper he handled. First, no permits, none, had been issued for anything Vivian had poured, painted, posted, or paved within a mile of my coordinates. Second, my original recorded survey was indeed missing from the countercopy, but alive and well in microfilm and cross, referenced in the county surveyor's log with redundancies that would make a NASA tech blush. Third, Vivian had assembled a bouquet of shell companies over the last 18 months, names that sounded like candle scents on cash flow statements that together wrapped 3 sides of my property in speculative ambition. Assemblage, I said, remembering the plays I'd seen in my concrete days by a ring of parcels in secret. Pressure the last holdout and flip the whole bundle as luxury estates to pay off the notes. She's overextended, Rex said, and then gave me the number like a diagnosis, $2.4 million in development loans, collateralized by projected HOA assessments and rezoning plans that assumed my road would be public within 6 months. A house of cards, I thought, and I was the gust. That afternoon, a certified letter from Patan and Associates, the same firm that had closed the sale of my business 3 years ago, arrived threatening a $50,000 lawsuit and attorney's fees because my survey stakes defaced community property. I laughed out loud because the irony was too perfect, then slid the envelope into the tab marked Legal Theater and wrote a note to call Catherine in Dallas if the farce escalated. It did. Of course, everything escalates when someone's balance sheet is bleeding. The informal mediation invitation landed next. Embossed county letterhead lending gravitas to what turned out to be a corporate takeover meeting in miniature, 12 HOA board members in a semicircle. Vivian's lawyer with a folder thick enough to stop a .45, 2 commissioners who looked like hostages at their own table, and me with my binder and a pen that writes fine lines and firm endings. Vivian clicked through a PowerPoint about community impact and traffic safety that would have killed houseplants, then slid a sheet across the table with a number that might have bought me a decent base boat in 1998, $15,000 for my road easement. Generously accounting for legal complications your obstruction has created, the perfume couldn't cover the stink of desperation. I stood, straightened my jacket, and said I'd consider her offer immediately after she considered my counterproposal of 0 and a public apology, then left them to explain to elected officials why their names were on stationery. For a meeting that had no business being official, petty power hates air. It flails when you let light in. The retaliation campaign turned mean and precise. I woke Thursday to the smell of dying, St. Augustine, and found the irrigation main cut where my water line crossed under the freshly laid asphalt. Before I could call a plumber, Vivian phoned to inform me that any destruction of community infrastructure would require a $5,000 damage deposit and board approval. That afternoon, our mailbox met a baseball bat at 3 a.m., according to Marcus's camera. The next day, herbicide burned a message into our front lawn in a font so petty it screamed committee. Bright orange paint arced across our siding like a scarlet letter, designed by a colorblind vandal. The county's tax office announced a reevaluation based on roadway improvements, jacking our bill from $4,200 to $7,800 and requiring payment in full before appeal. Our insurer discovered commercial exposure due to increased traffic and demanded $4,000 more a year. Child Protective Services knocked, politely with a mandatory check prompted by a report about unsafe conditions, that turned out to be our garage workshop. Elena's superintendent relayed an anonymous concern about her judgment in light of her husband's hostile legal behavior, and she came home pale but steady. Placed a note under the magnet on our fridge that read, "We are not bending," and kissed my cheek with the kind of quiet that says this house is a fortress made of paper and patience, not brick and threat. Through it all, the beautification walks continued. Matching t-shirts and matching whispers, phones held at angles designed to capture maximum insinuation and minimum context. Passive-aggressive captions blooming on Facebook hours later like mold on warm bread. Interesting landscaping choices. Wonder if this meets fire safety standards. What they didn't realize was that their theater was now a set for our documentary. Marcus had mounted cameras at angles they wouldn't spot. Dr. Patricia Hernandez from 3 doors down started dropping by with printouts of case law that read like bedtime stories to me. And Janet Kowalski, a teacher whose organizational skills could shame a general, began charting incidents on a whiteboard with markers that gave each tactic a color: blue for fines, red for vandalism, green for bureaucratic shenanigans. On Friday, the county planning clerk, the one with Vivian's last name and her hair, told me with a smile that my driveway permit would require reapplication. $2,800, 6 to 8 months. And during that time, my access would be under review. I walked out and called the county engineer from the parking lot. Asked him if he preferred email or hand delivery for the packet of unpermitted work, drainage violations, and stop work order photos I was preparing. And he said hand. Weary in a way that told me this wasn't the first time someone had tried to run a power line through the rules. By sunset, Deer stepped out of the oak shade as if to remind me the world still runs on cycles bigger than HOA meetings. And Sophia leaned her head on my shoulder and asked if people always got this ugly over asphalt. Over power, I said, and told her the truth I've learned across 100 job sites and one marriage that works. Bullies rarely want the thing they're swinging at. They want the flinch. That night, with Alina clearing plates and Jasmine easing in through the screen, I laid out the next lines on the map in my head. Rex's courthouse dive had given me the skeleton of Vivian's scheme shell company's overdue loans. A rezoning petition she would have to try to push through a planning commission. Already tired of her voice, and the survey had given me the spine. I printed the preliminary plat, 3 copies, and mailed one certified to the HOA's registered agent with a letter that said, as politely as I could manage, cease all encroachment on my private property. Any further alterations will be treated as willful trespass and referred to law enforcement. I filed a formal complaint with the EPA's regional office about the wetland drainage I suspected. Her roadwork had altered, the creek behind our place had shifted, color in a way I recognized from a lifetime of watching water go where it should and tanned. Drafted a note to a property rights attorney in Dallas who makes opposing counsel cry into their legal pads. The week had taught me 2 things I already knew but needed to feel in my bones again. Permits outlast hashtags, and records are how you breathe underwater. As for the tow trucks, the county's impound yards answer my calls first, not because I'm scary, but because I always bring them coffee and clean paperwork. If you pave a man's private road in the night and slap a bill on his mailbox for the privilege, you'd better make sure your fleet's registrations are pristine and your parking habits spotless. I slept the kind of sleep that comes when your plan has edges. And I woke before dawn to coyote voices and diesel engines warming up somewhere down the hill. By the time Friday rolled around, our garage had shed the last traces of weekend projects and become a war room, maps taped to studs, plat overlays pinned with thumbtacks, legal documents clipped to clotheslines like white flags we had no intention of waving, and a timeline that ran the length of 2 folding tables with colored string connecting who did what to who, signed off to where the law bites hardest. Marcus brought his Marine's appetite for order in a Pelican case full of cameras, radios, and motion sensors. Dr. Hernandez arrived with a stack of case law and a mind like a scalpel. Janet Kowalski set up a command ledger, so clean it made my old construction spreadsheets blush. And Rex slid in with a banker's box labeled Morse permits, emails, that smelled like courthouse basements, and trouble inside were rubber-stamped approvals. backdated site inspections, and a paper trail that tied Commissioner Bradley Morse to Vivian's grand vision with twine thicker than family. That afternoon, I got Catherine. Silverman on a video called Dallas's Meanest. Property rights attorney with a 94% win rate and a reputation for turning depositions into public confessions, and she laid out a strategy that clicked into my bones. We'd file a quiet title action to confirm the access road private in perpetuity, language, and parrot, same day. With a federal environmental complaint over the wetland diversion her midnight paving had created. Then layer in an anti-slap motion the minute their injunction hit, which it would, because bullies don't know how to skip steps. We'll also trigger their insurance, Catherine said, smiling like a chess player who's already seen the end game. One clean property damage claim against the HOA's liability policy forces their carrier to investigate representations. And if they lied on the application or hid criminal exposure, that policy voids retroactively, and the board is personally on the hook for everything fees, judgments, restoration, and I felt the quiet satisfaction of a beam seeding into a pocket perfectly. Meanwhile, Fiance caught up to our paper. A wetland specialist in a sun-faded ball cap walked the drainage with me and pointed to the subtle, damming things scum lines where they shouldn't be, a changed flow pattern at the culvert, read die-off on the wrong bank, then wrote a report in plain English that ended with numbers EPA lawyers love, daily penalty exposure per 33 USC citations. Sarah Sawyer from Channel 7, who'd started as a bystander to Vivian's PR stunts, came out twice without a camera, sat at our workbench with her notebook, and listened as Rex unfolded shell companies and loan covenants and HOA dues. Pledged as collateral like a magician pulling out scarves. That all read fraud, and she promised to hold her exposed until our filings landed because she was after corruption, not clicks. The financial choke point arrived in the form of Jake Morrison, tow truck king and owner of the county's biggest impound yard, who slapped a stack of unpaid invoices on the table and grinned like a coyote in a chicken coop. Turns out Vivian owed him $12,000 for enforcement. Tows the HOA had ordered and never paid. Mechanics liens beat most debts, Jake said, tapping the page. If their fleet parks where they shouldn't, or blocks access, I don't need their permission to make a problem disappear. And I remembered why I've always brought coffee to tow yards and never argued weight ratings with men who live by chains. We put our plan on rails but didn't serve it. We filed preliminary notices in all the right places and let them sit like bait. No process server knocking on doors. No warning that the ground had shifted. Because Catherine wanted Vivian to strut while the net tightened. Marcus wired the perimeter with new cameras at head height and sign height so you could see hands, faces, bolt cutters, and intent. And he spun up encrypted neighbor comes on an app most people think is just for hobby radio nerds. Janet created 4 watch desks with rotating volunteers permits, social media, board meetings, and utility activity so every rumor came with a timestamp and a screenshot. Every flyer had a photograph of who taped it where. Every anonymous complaint to the fire marshal collected in a spreadsheet with columns for call origin and outcome. The bait worked almost too well. 2 nights later, a crew rolled in with unmarked pickups and portable floodlights and started installing speed bumps and residents-only signage, along what Vivian's posts now called community infrastructure, all while she strutted. In a pink tracksuit and designer sneakers like a suburban foreman at a midnight road job. Marcus's cameras caught license plates, faces, and the part I appreciated most, a shot of Vivian handing a worker a handful of zip ties and telling him to make those signs tight so he can't just pull them. Proof of hand-on modifications in my right-of-way. The next afternoon, Alina met Vivian's last good angle at the high school parking lot, where our perfumed antagonist sidled up to my wife with a hush-money smile and offered $25,000 from the Community Improvement Fund if I would drop the lawsuit nonsense. Alina, God bless her, had her phone recording before a vowel left that mouth and captured it all. The bribe. The source of funds. The threat dressed as concern. Think about Sophia's college fund. And the casual admission that this could drag on for years and cost you everything. The kind of sentence that turns juries into thunder. We archived the file 3 ways local cloud, and an encrypted drive in a fireproof box, then forwarded a #2. Catherine and watched her answer with a one-word text: beautiful. The smear machine ground its gears louder in response. Anonymous flyers on windshields, accusing me of running an illegal business from home. Calls to CPS that forced a polite inspector to compliment Elena's labeling system. A sudden commercial exposure letter from our insurer, hiking premiums for grand. A utilities relocation study for $8,500 based on complaints about private power lines crossing Community Road. Nofia's college application flagged for address anomalies. And finally, a city planning commission petition from Vivian to reclassify my road as public thoroughfare with a hearing date. Circled 6 weeks out so she could pack the room with neighbors who'd been taught to equate my rights with their convenience. The nerve would have impressed me if I weren't already bored of it. But beneath the noise, property by walking past it. Especially when gates closed every winter since 1987. Marcus's incident logs read like a training manual in restraint under provocation. Janet's social media counter-campaign. Willowbrook Property Rights Alliance attracted 127 members in 2 days, many of whom had their own small stories of mistrash, lowball offers, mysterious fines, and suddenly lost permits. And Rex's financial dive turned the screw. Vivian's LLCs were 90 days from default on $2.4 million in loans, predicated on rezoning that couldn't happen if my road stayed private. And she'd already maxed $67,000 in personal credit trying to hold the dam. We were no longer fending off a busybody. We were quietly reducing a simple fraud to its elements: motive, means, and timeline. Catherine's favorite trap was the insurance play. We filed a property damage claim with the HOA's carrier for the destroyed fence posts, survey stakes, and cut irrigation. And within 48 hours, their adjuster was on site asking the kinds of questions that make presidents of boards sweat under their blazers. Who authorized this work? Where are the permits? Did you disclose pending legal action on your renewal? And by the way, why are there brass plaques declaring grand entrance on a privately deeded access road? And even the adjuster's small talk had edges. We also prepared an anti-slap motion in draft form, so the moment their injunction moved to silence our public posts or demand removal of harassing signs, we could file and seek mandatory attorney's fees for their trouble. On the press front, Sarah rehearsed her questions with the patience of someone sharpening a spear. Environmental law, municipal corruption, family ties between Morse and Vivian, and the pattern of emergency improvements that all seemed to thread money from homeowners to shell accounts. She didn't want a splash, she wanted a dam to burst. And then, because hubris is a clock you can set your watch by, Vivian called for Community Action Day, wholesome Facebook event page festooned with clip art, lemonade, and barbecue that described restoring proper standards, but in the comments revealed the real agenda: bring bolt cutters. We've got sledgehammers, time to remove illegal signs and cameras. We can do this together. Neighbors, and a smiley face that made my teeth hurt. Janet screen grabbed it all. Marcus briefed Deputy Rodriguez, the veteran who'd been documenting everything quietly for 3 weeks, and we staged without announcing. Elena took Sophia to her sister's for the day. The war room hummed. The radios checked green, the cameras rolled. And Jake Morrison parked 2 flatbeds where no one would notice until they needed to. Because while Catherine loved a courtroom, and I love a clean plat, there are lessons only a tow hook can teach, and some people don't hear the law until a chain tightens around their axle. They showed up for Community Action Day like a tailgate that had lost its mind. Pickup beds, rattling with bolt cutters and sledgehammers, matching Willowbrook Pride t-shirts stretched over righteous indignation. The air sharp with gasoline and the metallic clank of tools as Vivian climbed out of her white BMW in a pink tracksuit and clipboard, purring morning neighbors like she wasn't about to lead a felony field trip onto my land. Marcus had cameras high and low and a body cam blinking red. I had my own handheld rolling and Deputy Rodriguez quiet, squared, and done with nonsense pulled up just as Vivian lined her volunteers at the fence like a book club about to storm the Bastille. Folks need to step back from the property line, he called, palm resting on his radio, voice flat as a level. "This is private land, and you're currently trespassing." Vivian turned the bolt cutters into a scepter and began her aria about harassment of taxpaying citizens and community standards, whipping her crowd into a murmur while they shuffled, glanced at the deputy, and did the math. Then, because hubris is a schedule you can set your watch by, she stepped over my marker and reached for a camera post 2 strides into my easement, tool up. Mouth still running, so Rodriguez gave her one last plain English clause, and when she kept moving, the cuffs clicked. A small metallic period that sucked the air out of the morning and made 3 of her bravest suddenly remember appointments elsewhere. 2 volunteers who'd already hopped the line joined her in receiving the wrist jewelry and citations for criminal trespass. And right then, a news van rolled in camera shouldered by Sarah Sawyer's crew, because Vivian had invited them for a sympathy set. Instead, they filmed their host being walked to a cruiser, still waving bolt cutters, and lecturing the Constitution in a workout suit, which is not a look that tests well outside reality TV. Sarah did what reporters used to do as a matter of course, interviewed both sides. Then pivoted to the meat. EPA violations on drainage diversion. No bid work rubber stamped by Commissioner Morse, her brother-in-law. And backdated inspections for roadwork that never saw a permit cutting her segment around. Vivian's on-camera meltdown that included the kind of admissions prosecutors replay for juries. We have to bring non-conforming neighbors into compliance, and sometimes people need a push to do what's right. Well, the cameraman got B-roll of Pride volunteers slinking away with tools under their shirts. Jake Morrison's 2 flatbeds slid in ghost quiet to collect the illegally parked security SUVs that had been squatting across my driveway all week. See, mechanics' liens don't argue about feelings. Jake had 12 grand in unpaid invoices from the HOA. The tow authority was square, and within 20 minutes the steel-kissed axles, chains hummed, and those rolling intimidation props were headed for a legal purgatory with a daily rate that makes bravado go pale. By lunchtime, Sarah's live hit had reshaped the narrative from selfish holdout blocks, progress to HOA, President's volunteer mob arrested on private land amid environmental and municipal fraud claims, and the cascade you only get when truth finds a microphone began. The HOA's insurance carrier, already twitchy from our property damage claim, issued a coverage hold pending investigation for criminal activity. Exclusions banks froze the balances of 2 of Vivian's shell company accounts as fraud alerts, tripped off Rex's packet sent through a friendly counsel, and a very calm voice from the FBI's local financial crimes unit left me a message asking for the index numbers on our exhibits, because grand jury subpoenas were in the works. That night, an emergency board meeting, this one packed with residents who smelled blood and wanted their dues back devolved. Into shouted arithmetic as Janet's printouts walked everyone through a $127,000 community improvement hole that looked exactly like loan payments on failing parcels. And when the treasurer tried to blame accounting software issues, Dr. Hernandez stood, asked for a vote, and got herself elected interim president by acclamation, while Marcus and Janet were drafted on the spot for an oversight committee. Their first acts were not vengeance but daylight. Publish the books. Freeze discretionary spending. Apologize to the people who'd been fined for invented sins. And hire a neutral auditor whose first question, bless him, was show me your incorporation certificate and recorded covenants, and when none appeared, his second was then, what exactly have you been enforcing? Meanwhile, EPA Region 6 opened a formal inquiry off our wetland report and began the letter per day ritual that calculates penalties in numbers that make men sell boats. And the county attorney who had been enduring Morse's swagger for years slipped us copies of expedited approvals bearing the digital signature of an inspector who was out of town the day he supposedly visited. By breakfast the next morning, Rick the Pie, who'd once been on Vivian's payroll, swung by with an affidavit and the recording where she offered him 10 grand to find something that will stick on my land. And I watched Catherine's eyes smile over the phone when I played it for her. Perfect, she said. Let them keep digging there past the point of sunlight being optional, And then she filed the quiet title action and the federal environmental complaint at 9:02 a.m. while Sarah queued her follow-up for the noon slot. And the HOA's carrier sent a reservation of rights letter that might as well have been a Dear John. Over the next 48 hours, the optics and the money unspooled in tandem. Vivian, arraigned and out on bond, tried to reclaim the narrative with a Facebook Live that peaked at 20 viewers and ended when commenters started posting screenshots of the stop work order taped to her grand entrance pillars. A half-dozen families who'd been fined into silence DM'd the Property Rights Alliance with their receipts and stories. And Janet scheduled kitchen table interviews like a political organizer with a crusade. A deputy served subpoenas at the HOA office and county building, while Morris pretended to be in a meeting and then got photographed leaving through a side door with a folder over his face, which Sarah ran split screen with his signature on environmental waivers he never had authority to sign. And late one night, Jake's trucks made a second pass, this time for the HOA security cart and two more SUVs that a handful of diehards had parked nose to gate to reclaim community access. And I slept through the winch song like a baby because there's a special piece in watching theatrics meet ordinance and ordinance win. By Sunday afternoon, the board that had once treated Vivian like a queen was a skeleton crew pushing out a statement that read like a capitulation, temporary leadership change, full cooperation with authorities, commitment to transparency, and the community that had smirked at our rustic access was leaving apology pies on our porch because there's nothing more clarifying than seeing a neighbor in handcuffs confess her strategy on camera. The sheriff increased patrols not because we were scared, but because he'd smelled the last of the mob energy and wanted a witness with a badge if any of it tried to flare. And I spent that evening on the porch with Elena listening to a chorus that had been missing for months, just birds and kids, and the soft rattle of wind and live oak while Sophia sat between us scrolling a comments section that, for once, was kind. Monday morning, Catherine called to say the court had set an early hearing on our quiet title and would entertain an injunction against further encroachment. The EPA had referred the drainage to criminal investigators, and Sarah had a producer cutting a longer piece because she'd just learned what we already knew from Rex's files. Vivian's entire assemblage model was financed on the fantasy of forced membership and expanded assessments, and it collapses when one holdout doesn't blink. Calendars began to fill her, arraignments, hearings, depositions, and I pulled the big binder off the shelf, the one with the tabs that had become a metronome for our days. And I felt the momentum shift in my bones in that subtle way you can't prove on paper but can smell on air. After rain, we weren't fighting rumors anymore. We were feeding records to machines designed to eat them. And the people who'd paved my rights at night were finally learning what happens when sunlight and statute meet on camera. The courthouse smelled faintly of floor wax and coffee, that bureaucratic mix that says the next few hours will matter whether anyone raises their voice or not. And when Catherine slid the quiet title order across the table to me signed, stamped, and written in the kind of language even bullies don't mistake, my shoulders loosened for the first time in months. The road, private in perpetuity, not subject to any HOA covenant, assessment, or interference whatsoever. A permanent injunction against encroachment. And a clock that gave the board 15 days to remove every last trace of Vivian's grand entrance from my easement. The county sent a crew with a backhoe and a dump truck, and I stood with Deputy Rodriguez as brass plaques clanged into a bin and the illegal asphalt at the junction peeled up like a bad idea. The stop work orange that had fluttered for weeks came down last, folded carefully by a planner who'd been waiting his whole career to do something that felt like a civics textbook. Catherine's second filing hit just as hard. The federal environmental complaint moved from paper to action when EPA Region 6 referred the drainage diversion for criminal review. And in an irony so clean, it felt scripted, the same culvert Vivian had used to justify community improvements became Exhibit A in a case that assigns penalties by the day. The civil pieces began to fall like lined-up dominoes of property damage, claim that forced the HOA's carrier to issue a reservation of rights and then rescind coverage for misrepresentation. a stipulated removal agreement that spared the county a fight by making the board pay their own contractor to undo their president's art project. And on my side, a clean award of fees under the state's anti-SLAPP statute when their half-hearted injunction to silence our posts limped into court and died under the first question. The criminal calendar took longer because real prosecutions do. But when the indictments landed, they read like a map. Wire fraud and mail fraud tied to shell company transfers and fake notices, civil rights deprivations under color of law for the Guard Theater and false reports, environmental crimes for the wetland diversion, and RICO predicates that stitched it all into a pattern of small town's version of organized theft dressed in athleisure. Commissioner Morse, who had worn confidence like a cologne, took a plea on falsified approvals and no-bid sweetheart work. 2 city staffers pled to lesser charges and agreed to testify. And Vivian, who had broken every rule of power and then filmed herself doing it, fought until the day her attorney asked the judge for a recess and came back with a plea that still put her name on a bunk for years. The sentencing hearing felt like a community exhaled. Sarah Sawyer's camera in the back row. Neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder, Marcus in his dress blues, Dr. Hernandez with a folder of medical notes, Janet with a stack of color-coded victim affidavits, and Alina on my right, steady as bedrock. The U.S. Attorney's team put on our months in 20 minutes, 847 exhibits numbered and logged, 12 video clips of trespass and vandalism and midnight construction, bank records showing $340,000 bled through improvement accounts to service bad loans, the wetland specialist explaining read-die-off and altered flow with a quiet authority that made the law's teeth look clean. Victim impact isn't theater when it's lived. Alina described the day a school board whisper tried to turn my fight into her problem, and how she learned to breathe through strangers' threats. Dr. Hernandez explained stress-induced care for 4 families and the hollow in a neighborhood when people stop waving because one voice tells them not to. And an older couple from the far cul-de-sac cried, telling the judge how their grandson stopped biking to their house because the security cart liked to tail him as a lesson. When it was her turn, Vivian tried to make a speech about protecting property values, the same broken advertisement she'd run at every podium. And Judge Morrison let her spool 10 minutes of it before she cut in with a tone that could level a field. Property rights aren't negotiable. Fraud isn't governance, and harassment is not a community standard. The sentence at years in federal prison, 3 years supervised release, restitution, and forfeiture landed with a thud you could feel through the bench. Forfeiture turned theory into repairs, her house, the investment lots, and the BMW already repossessed converted into checks for victims and a $2.1 million wetland restoration fund that put crews and waiters along Miller's Creek within a month. EPA called our case a model and paid for signage that explains to second graders how runoff works, and 2 would-be moguls how laws do. On the civil side, RICO treble damages gave my ledger the symmetry it deserved for $180,000 for property damage, legal fees, and the 100 little cuts that make a year long. While the quiet title decree sealed the one thing that had started this fight: my road, my rules. No committee required. The community that had cheered grand entrance in brass remade itself in paper and light. Dr. Hernandez took 89% of the vote for president of what is now Cedar Falls Neighbors. The bylaws fit on 4 pages and cover brush cuts, snow days, and the retention pond. Monthly budgets show money in, money out. And nothing that needs euphemism and annual dues fell from $2,400 to $400 because it turns out you can run a neighborhood on Sunlight for a lot less than it costs to run it on Secrets. Property values did what they always do when fear leaves and trees going up. By 40+% in a year, helped along by the new wildlife corridor, our northern fence now borders. We left the driveway gravel where it belongs, but worked with the county to cut a parallel path through HOA Greenbelt to the preserve. And families walk there every evening with strollers and leashes, reading placards about salamanders and due process funded by money Vivian had once planned to spend paving the rest of us flat. The story refused to stay local. Sarah's long piece won an Emmy and aired in 12 other states as a warning and a blueprint. Jake Morrison's tow business tripled because corrupt boards don't read statutes until a chain tightens around a wheel. And the legislature passed the Property Owner Protection Act with a bipartisan shrug. Mandatory $2 million officer misconduct insurance for HOAs, a state ombudsman for property rights disputes, criminal penalties for harassment campaigns, and a requirement that any association claiming jurisdiction post its incorporation and recorded covenants where a 7th grader can find them. At our house, the loudest thing is laughter again. Sophia wrote her admissions essay about standing. Your ground in a neighborhood that forgot what ground. Is 4-in-1 a full ride to UT Engineering with a plan to design better stormwater systems than the one a pink tracksuit once tried to fake? Alina was promoted to assistant superintendent after steering her district through the very public mess with more grace than I deserved to stand next to. And the vacation to Alaska that we'd postponed for subpoenas turned into a week of watching bears take salmon in water so clear it felt like honesty. We kept a promise to turn anger into something that lives longer than headlines. A portion of my settlement seated the Willowbrook Veteran Scholarship in the first recipient, a quiet kid whose dad held our ladder the day we hung the first Kamrashuk. Marcus's hand with tears in both their eyes. Our third Freedom Road Festival filled the cul-de-sac with barbecue smoke and kids. Chalk galaxies where a security cart used to idle. In the community center deeded by forfeiture from the house that once hosted emergency meetings. I'll teach conflict resolution on Tuesday nights to teenagers who will inherit our streets. I still keep the binder by the door, not as a shrine to a fight, but as a manual for peace stabs. For permits and plats and polite letters that say no with teeth, and once a month I walk the line with a thermos and tighten the screws on the camera housings, not because I'm scared, but because vigilance is respect in work boots. Some mornings when the mockingbirds tune up and Jasmine lifts off the porch, I think about the night asphalt smell that started all this, and the diesel song at 3 a.m. that ended a smaller lesson. Inside the larger one, that chain and statute both have their place, and then I drink my coffee and listen. Hard to the absence of engines where they don't belong. And I remember the only motto worth handing on: document everything. Know your rights and let the law do the heavy lifting. The rest is birds, gravel under tires, and a road that says what it means without brass.